You're listening to the Jōrni Podcast. Could our brains simply lose the ability to feel joy? Join me for today's eye-opening episode. Hi, I'm Petra Brunbauer. What if everything we've been told about holistic health, healing, and well-being is only part of the story? Because thriving in today's world looks different than it used to. Here, we challenge the narratives, rethink what it means to become human, and explore how that shapes the way we lead, live, and step into our full potential. This is the Jōrni Podcast. Welcome to today's episode. We explore the fascinating intersection of stress, the brain, and our innate capacity for transformation within all three. Our brains are so much more than just a physical organ, and understanding this can empower us on both personal and collective levels. Dr. Amy Albright is a doctor of Chinese medicine, executive advisor, and co-founder of Holon, a rare synthesis of clinician, oracle, and strategist. Possibly the only practitioner in the world working simultaneously at the level of elite executive coaching, neurological architecture, and the human energetic field. Founders and leaders seek her out at the most consequential chapters of their lives. She works at the level of the system, seeing what others miss, moving what others can't touch, dissolving patterns that have resisted every prior approach, and activating capacities her clients didn't know they had. At the heart of her practice is the Holon Lab, where her team directly shapes neurological architecture using advanced EEG neurofeedback, in-depth brain mapping, and cutting-edge recovery technologies. What shifts in the field gets encoded in the brain. What changes in the brain reorganizes how a person perceives, responds, and leads. Transformation, in her world, is not a concept. It is trained, embodied, and built to last. Here is my interview with Dr. Amy Albright. Hi, Dr. Amy. It's so great to have you on the podcast today. I've been looking forward to getting to chat with you because we are going to be talking about some of my favorite topics. That is stress and the brain. I feel there is so much we can explore just in that alone, a huge field. And of course, we all have a brain and most of us have stress. So I feel that this applies to nearly everybody who's listening in today. And I want to even say everybody. So thank you for being here today, taking the time for joining me, and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I've been looking forward to this conversation as well, Petra. It's really great to be here.
Yeah, thank you. I feel especially in these times where people have so much stress, it seems, this is a topic that's really important to explore, maybe give some clarity on, and share some things that are important when it comes to this and things that you have discovered as well. So I'm really excited that we'll be talking about this today. Now, for starters, would you like to share maybe a little bit about yourself and maybe the pieces of your story or your journey that you feel relate to what you do today, and also share with our listeners what it is that you do today?
Okay, yeah, sure. So my professional training, my doctorate is in Chinese medicine, which is really unexpected because if you track back at age 18, I was studying the brain as an undergrad, as an atheist. I was not interested in anything to do with healing per se, although I definitely knew I wanted to help people. And I was pursuing an academic career to get a doctorate of study of the brain. And I was pretty convinced at age 18 that if we could understand neurotransmitters, which were the hot topic of the brain back then we could understand what it is to be human and the human experience. So I did always have that deep fundamental curiosity about what it is to be human and perhaps consciousness, although I would never use that word. But it's actually what ended up happening at age 18 is I had a massive spiritual experience, a massive spiritual awakening experience, which was very unscheduled because I was an atheist. Like I wasn't a seeker. I didn't know that this even existed. And at that point, I'd started to study the brain much more holistically rather than just anatomy and physiology and pathology and neurotransmitters intersecting inside of synapses. I started to study how does brain impact what we perceive and how does it impact our behavior at a more global level. And then I also wove in the study of what it is to be human through time via a lot of courses in anthropology. So I started to study shamanism academically. I started to study working with entheogens academically. And this is back in the 90s. So it's been a minute. I'm almost 51, and the spiritual awakening and this pivot in my path was at age 18. So I've been on this journey of discovery and a combination of academic and scientific rigor, and also a deep personal journey into my own spiritual development, into my own understanding of what it is to be human. And that's really influenced my practice and my life. When I first started as a Chinese medicine practitioner is when I realized that I was way more tapped in than I realized. I thought that what I was reading for intuition and all of these other aspects that were represented in my studies of the indigenous people of mostly of North and South America wasn't really for me. I just thought I was a watcher, an onlooker. And I think that that's a really important element of the sadness and the stress that I was feeling. So I'll weave that in later as we talk about what is stress really. We all know some modern causes of stress, but what are some deeper causes of stress? Anyhow, as it wove through, I ended up realizing that I didn't want to study the brain for the rest of my life because in academia, you're allowed one topic within the brain. And I was going to definitely be bored if I had to study just one aspect of the brain for the rest of my life. I ended up having a very strong calling to attend Chinese medicine school. And as soon as I got out, I realized, like I said, that I had all of these intuitive capacities on board. And so much of what people were really struggling with, because as a practitioner of Chinese medicine, really there's no limit to what you want to ask about. Everything impacts everything. Relationships and stress are as important as understanding digestive function or the back pain that somebody's coming in for. And then at some point, I became much more known for my capacities, let's say, in an oracular way. So my ability to see through illusion, to see through to the core of what it is that was really happening for someone, and to be able to name that in rapid form and create sometimes very spontaneous and very deep healing experiences for people and clarifying, path clarifying, life clarifying, business clarifying decisions. So within a couple of years, I had a 1-year waiting list for a new patient, and I started to specialize because I realized, wow, I was overwhelmed with my practice. So as I was specializing, I realized that the most high yield that I could focus on would be working with leaders, pioneers, and visionaries, because then those folks, when uplifted, would go and uplift so many more. So that's been the major through line. And then about, I forget, maybe many years into practice, I ended up meeting up with a colleague in neurosciences, and he had been doing neurofeedback therapy and other neuromodulation for a long time. And so we've been practicing side by side for 10 of the last 15 years. And so that's where a really deep clinical understanding of the brain has come for me. I am definitely not the neuroscientist of the team, but working so deeply alongside to change individuals' lives in our shared practice for so many years has allowed me to understand the brain at a very functional level. So a lot of people who talk about the brain or understand the brain understand it to whatever extent that they do, because first off, it's a vast topic and nobody can understand everything. But also a lot of people who talk about the brain are actually experts in theory or academic understanding, and not necessarily in how to get real people real change, and how real people look and feel on all the levels, what their EEG looks like, their electroencephalogram looks like, and then how do we actually change using very, very rigorous scientific methods and study? How do we actually verify that we're changing the brain for the better alongside of changing how somebody is feeling about themselves and life around them? Because, of course, I've brought that through line forward of understanding that we live inside of an interconnected reality. The studies of those indigenous folks around the world, but especially in North and South America, that flavored my lens and outlook on life really has had me understand from such an early age that we're working inside of a very alive and interconnected universe. And yet the scientific studies have helped me to stay very, very grounded in that. So the work represents that today with this really potent blend of neuroscience and spirituality, energetic sciences. And part of the weave that kind of came in through those years when I was working with leadership is a really deep understanding of how to support people in business, how to support very high functioning peak performers, and also how to support those that are wanting to open up their intuitive capacities or also have a huge amount of intuitive capacities already revealed and want to further explore that. It's a very unique intersection, Petra. I don't think I could have made such a career path up for myself. It just kept on opening as I've gone, and it's continuing to do so. So thank you for asking. It's really fun to see how all of these flavors of things have truly influenced my day-to-day work with clients and patients.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing a little bit about your journey. And yes, I feel this is really unique in how you're working in this field and bringing this to your clients. I feel that when we talk about the brain, there really is so much more than just, I want to say, a piece of equipment in our body, because we look at it certainly as something physical, that sits in our head. But by the sounds of what you have studied and what you have experienced, that's almost a very limiting view of what the brain actually is and what it does for us, not just physically, but I get the sense it's much beyond a physical thing that the brain does. So in your studies and in your journeys, what are you finding when it comes to the brain? Is it really just a cluster of cells and things that sit in our head, or how have you come to view that after everything that you have experienced and found?
Yeah, thanks for the question. It's actually a really big one. And most people who specialize in the brain academically are very afraid to speak of consciousness. It's interesting that they're willing to speak in high levels of specificity about specific attributes or capacities of the brain, but not actually what it is to be a human, and certainly not necessarily from the lens of the holistic understanding of being human, which is so much about love and connection not just to people or to our pets or to our place that we live, but actually to the entire cosmos, right? Or to the all that is, or to the divine or God, or whatever word we want to use for that larger placement of where we land. And I would say that the brain is extremely advanced. I would say that most people who are known for speaking about the brain have likely dumbed it down because they want to get more people engaged with the conversation than they do be specific to and accurate, which I understand. But just so that people know, there's so much more than just waves or a bunch of neurons. There's actually all different kinds of cells. There's all different kinds of mysteries that are transpiring within the brain. And although we can safely and effectively work with the brain since the 1960s in the ways that we're doing now, we've got it obviously much more advanced than since the 1960s. So although what we're doing is safe and proven, it's actually, we stand on that precipice of understanding that we don't understand. And I think that that's a humble place that everybody that loves science should remember to stay seated in, because otherwise we end up praying to the false god of science rather than actually wondering, actually being curious, having that beginner's mind and the learning mindset. It's so critical rather than pretending that we've conquered certain domains, and especially the brain. So to answer your question more directly, I would say that the brain is more of a massively intelligent receiver of the divine intelligence. It is not just a computer that makes the mind work. Because what's actually happening inside of the brain at any given moment is that we are remembering, we are operating, we are moving through the world in such a way that we don't even consciously process. So we associate the mind with maybe conscious processing, or we could say we have a subconscious mind, but that doesn't actually make up for our innate intelligence? How do we explain gnosis? How do we explain all of these things? Like, we can't say that bonding comes from oxytocin. It's not like a cake recipe where you have like a few things that you've tossed in and then that's what you get. There's no way to explain the complexity of our existence by just simply looking at the collection of cells and what it is that they're doing. And I know that that would be a bit of a stretch for maybe some of the more atheistic scientists, but I think that any of us that are really humble inside of that can know that ultimately the brain is this intelligent receiver of this innate intelligence of the cosmos, not just a computational device. We want to make it simple like that. In some ways, maybe our own worldview and experience of reality would be simpler if it was simpler. But the good news is that we don't actually have to understand everything about our own brain for it to work. People will confuse that if they don't understand how their brain is doing what it's doing in our laboratory here, that they aren't doing it right. And it's like, no, wait, if we get out of the way and don't criticize or worry about that we're not doing it right, we actually do it better. The best performers tend to be the 5-year-olds or whatever, because they're not overthinking it. And don't you feel like that's the case in so much of life? Like
I feel
the child mentality,
yeah.
Right? Yeah.
We stand in our own way a lot because we think we can think ourselves into or out of things. And very often, I feel like you said, that creates blocks on its own that we could probably just get around if we kept that curiosity, that open mind, and just went with that. Absolutely.
Yeah, we work pretty much exclusively with adults. We'll occasionally have a child if they kind of petition to be a part of things here in a certain way, but mostly we work with adults. And I think that a little bit of context of what I'm referring to in our laboratory, just so that people can imagine it. Neurofeedback therapy is essentially, it's measuring, you start with a really we start with a very solid foundation of an EEG, which is the gold standard for measure of the electrical function of the brain. And we get a huge amount of specificity down to milliseconds of what's happening deep inside the brain, the various structures, the timing, whether they're communicating in a coherent fashion or not, and how certain nodes and networks are communicating, like the executive function or the default mode. And then also, yes, we get information about waves. And with neurofeedback therapy, after we take that really comprehensive baseline of the EEG, we're constantly measuring the brain. And the measurements of the brain are going into a computer and then are being fed back to the brain in a perceptual awareness faster than the mind can perceive. That's part of what's tricky about it, is when the grown-ups or most people are trying to gamify it, but it's actually a dialogue between the brain and the computer, which I think is an interesting correlation between the brain and the world around the brain all of the time, right? Whether that's conscious or subconscious interaction.
Wow. It opens up a whole new perspective of just thinking, okay, well, we have this thing in our heads that helps us logically think, make decisions, and plan our budget and our life. It opens the doors to just so much more when we look at the brain in this way of communication device, in a sense, as you said, a receiver, right? So looking at the fact that we may really be connected to everything and everyone out there, and there is a collective conscious potentially, right? This opens up so many exciting things. I want to say, even for our own healing journeys, when we don't look at the brain as unchangeable or fixed and it's just this sort of organ in our head, but we can communicate, we can change things, we can use this amazing intelligence to heal ourselves or whatever it is that we're looking for. So to me, this is absolutely exciting and fascinating what you are sharing here.
Yeah, thank you. It is. And I think that it's a lot of people feel like that they are the collection of their experiences of themselves, and that reality is the collection of experiences that they believe reality is. And this is a really well-founded understanding within psychology. But the truth of it is that there's actually so much more to ourselves. And the things that we might just consider personality quirks are actually represented in the brain. So if somebody has a propensity to be overthinking or overworrying, you can see it very directly in the EEG. you can actually specify, do they tend to overthink about themselves in a self-critical way? Or do they tend to overthink the world around them? Or do they tend to be hypervigilant and constantly scanning the horizon for threat? Those are very, very different versions of overthinking that are represented in an overactive area. And you can understand what version of overthinking somebody has by just simply looking at that EEG. A lot of people will think there's something wrong with me. I'm not lovable. There's a lot of really core beliefs that are out there that are founded potentially in the experience that somebody has of themselves. I see it kind of like judging. Imagine if you had a sprained ankle and then you're yelling at yourself that you're a weakling. It's kind of like, well, it doesn't feel very productive, really. If you could go to physical therapy and rest it and elevate it and do all the things that we know to do, then we know that we can heal that sprained ankle and that we can be strong again and forget that that ever happened. But what we tend to do with our psychology is say, I'm weak, I'm broken, I'm messed up. I have these traumas that I don't know how to get through. I have this stress that I don't know how to increase resilience for in any meaningful way. Maybe I should reduce the blue light before bedtime. Maybe that'll do it. Or maybe I should, the long list of all of these things, which I'm not discounting that any of those things matter because I actually teach that I know that they're important. I know that. But at the core of it, it's like there's a fundamental shift that's available that says, okay, if I'm experiencing discomfort inside of my reality, or I'm experiencing limitation as far as what I can feel or what I can accomplish in my life, and accomplish meaning more than money, what can I accomplish inside of connections, fulfillment, joy, and also, yes, maybe the ability to learn something or to be masterful in a certain domain. All of that exists inside of my brain. And all of that exists inside of then something that can be augmented, something that can be improved. Versus saying, oh no, I'm a failure. Oh no, I am this story. I am this trauma. I've always been this way. That's just how I am. I hear a lot of that. That's just how I am out there, including what we're kind of pointed toward today for a topic with stress. It's like, that's just how I am. And I would say that time and time again, we've seen really deeply miraculous change by changing how the brain is functioning, by working with neurofeedback therapy. It's not a new therapy. The way that we apply it is extremely different because we're looking not only to get somebody through their low moods or their feeling that they can't pay attention at their desk or whatever, but actually into that highest expression of who they are, the highest expression that they could possibly be. So we're looking for that potential that exists inside of everybody, and not just to do more with the same amount of energy, but to have more and be able to do more with more ease. And that really that's a stress buster right there, is to be able to do what we do without it feeling like it's taxing so much. And one of the things that we know in our practice is that when a brain is inefficient, everything is taxing. If we're wasting in a neurological hotspot, so sometimes people will have one of those overthinking areas. One of those overthinking areas might be pulling 30% of the wattage, of the electrical wattage of the brain. And now they have a really hard time with all other functions. And it's just they're driving a car down the road that they don't realize needs a tune-up and fresh spark plugs. And it's possible to change that. And it's also important to change that because it changes the entire fabric of our reality. When people look to do this sort of work, they're actually looking to change the quality of their life, which is different than investing in something that is a particular retreat that then they leave and they kind of go back to the same, or a vacation or something like that. Really investing in how the rest of the quality of life goes, the perspective, the capability, the ease. It's so massive. Can't underscore it enough.
Yeah, and it makes so much sense that when we're stressed or we're anxious or we're stuck in some of these cycles, how everything becomes so difficult, because that is a feeling that I'm guessing a lot of listeners can relate to, as well as all the other things in our lives, work, relationships, really anything connected, then feels like it's so much harder than it has to be. So that makes a lot of sense. The way that you're explaining that related to the brain. Now, I love the idea that we can be empowered to make changes. We don't have to say that this is just how life is. This is just who I am. This is just what it means to be an adult. There is room for us to actually change things if we want to do that. And how does the neurofeedback therapy actually come into this? So if you have a person who, for example, is highly stressed and that is affecting their lives, or they're burnt out, or they have a lot of anxiety, a lot of leaders deal with, of course, a lot of pressure also in their teams and businesses, and that stress does take its toll somewhere. So how does that come around in the brain when you're working with clients who have this kind of stress? And how does the neurofeedback tie into what you're doing in this work?
Yeah, then we can see that stress in the brain. Like I was saying, it's so specific. So what the neurofeedback allows us to do is to have the areas that are overactive. So like I was describing, if there's a power hog happening, and let's just say a cingulate, an aspect of the brain is overacting, or maybe it's the limbic system and the amygdala is overfiring based on all of this information that it's maybe getting from the cerebellum, for instance. What we can do is just basically with neurofeedback, tell that area of the brain to be calm. If it's trying to be overactive, then the person doesn't receive the reward. So the reward is either a sight and a sound, or just a sound, depending on the type of training. What this could look like is, imagine you're sitting in a chair and you're playing a video game with your brain, and your mind has no idea how you're doing it, and you're not touching anything with your hands, and you're moving something around on a screen, and you're hearing something, and you can be entertained by that. It's fun. It's just a fun thing to do. But the real dialogue is happening between the brain and the computer. And the computer, if it sees the brain going toward overthinking or stress, like too much limbic system, or maybe it's the prefrontal cortex or something that is overfiring, then it just makes those rewards go down. So the brain has been told by the mind says, oh, I want that sound though, and I want this spaceship to fly down this really cool tunnel, right? Or whatever the interface is. Then the mind, knowing that that's what it wants, then the brain is going to continue to reroute the information until those stress patterns are not firing like that. And what happens then is that the brain is trying thousands of different ways to find that way of functioning. And then as soon as it finds that way of functioning, there's an alleviation, there's a drop in how much electrical waste there is happening. And the brain starts to recognize, oh, wait a minute, now I have more resource for connection or higher order thinking. Because when we're really stressed, it's very difficult to have strategic thinking or to plan or to be productive even. All of those other functions are coming online, and depending on the type of training, we're actually upregulating those other functions that we're wanting to see boosted, and we're downregulating the stress and the noise and the inefficiency all at the same time, because the brain is quite a symphony and it responds better, just like we do on a conscious level. We can't just say, don't do this thing. We say, do this thing instead of that thing. And that's how we'll respond better. We want to have that option. So it's basically just giving a reward, a stimulus and a response, and a reward for the correct response and a non-reward for the incorrect response faster than the mind can perceive. It's happening in 40 milliseconds, this loop. And the mind is thinking about it at roughly a half a second or 400 milliseconds or something like that. So it's also a brilliant teacher in that we don't have to know how our brain is working, and that we can't control everything, and that we want to set up the right context for success. So neurofeedback therapy is, the way that we practice it is extremely specific for what that brain is needing to be able to have success, for stress and for burnout. And I think one more thing I want to add to that is that a really important factor that most people, I don't think, understand about stress and about burnout is that most people, when they really are in that mode, aren't getting rewards anymore. So there's a structure called the nucleus accumbens and even the hippocampus, the prefrontal cortex. There's a lot of players in this game. But what happens is that those areas are not signaling for joy anymore. So what happens is that whether it's a 7-year-old that's been pressed too hard to be academic and sit at a desk behind a computer, which is not really good for a developing 7-year-old's brain, or whether it's an adult that's got a startup and they're in burnout mode, what we can start to see in these folks is that they don't feel joy anymore. So they accomplish something and they have no response to it. they'll say something on a cognitive level to themselves that says, oh, whatever, on to the next thing, or, oh, anybody could have done that, or whatever, but they're not experiencing a joy response. So maybe that's in a part because we are so dopamine deprived. Maybe that's in part because we've been conditioned inside of this massive thoughts form that we are inside of on a sociological level to believe that we have to keep going and that we're in this fight or flight as a collective, not only as an individual. There's also a neurological correlate. There's a lot that goes on in there. And without that joy, I come to the question of what's the point? We could accomplish so many things, but if we don't enjoy our life, how do we find that right balance? And I'm an extremely driven person working with extremely driven people. So rather than tell them, just go meditate and live in an ashram and be happy without any doing or any desire or whatever, I would much rather say to them, let's keep all of your horsepower and let's make sure you're celebrating all of the small things, all of the big things, that you're so happy, you're so fulfilled, because that's actually, I believe, part of the secret sauce of genius is to be so passionate and alive by life that we're able to solve maybe bigger problems or stumble upon a miracle or whatever it is that can come, and also just enjoy our connections. Because I've seen too many people in the name of stress or at the inspiration of just money alone or success alone, outward, I'll say LinkedIn version of success alone, they forget that they actually care the most about their connections to themselves, maybe to a higher power, and then their family, their loved ones, their friends, nature, whatever it is that's important to them.
That's an amazing point that you just shared. And one of the things I want to say I hear most often from people when they are in stress, oh, I don't know why I'm doing this anymore. Oh, I had this great vision of why I started this business. Now I have no idea why I did that anymore. So there's this disconnect that happens when we become stressed or burnt out like that. And that's exactly what goes away is this joy, this thirst for life that we used to have. And somehow the main explanation I hear is like, well, I'm an adult now. That's just what it's like. I'm not a child anymore. But yet,
Right.
I feel what you're saying is the exact opposite, is that really we have the right to still be joyful and alive and have that thirst for curiosity and joy in ourselves. So yeah, as you said in the title of this episode, it's maybe not, the problem is not the stress, it's the brain state we're in at that time.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, totally. And not only do we have the right to be joyful, but I think that that's where we are guided down our most effective and efficient path, like under the idea that we all play a role. If we are feeling a place of non-joy, it may be that we're in the right role and we just need to fix our ability to feel the joy and our resilience or change factors and dynamics in our life, the way that the business functions or the quality of the relationships. There's all kinds of different things that can be looked at there. But if somebody's really in a career or has started a business that they don't have that passion for, it could be looked at that, hey, what if it's a 5% shift or a 30% shift in the same business? Or what if it's a totally different endeavor that's your actual path that will bring you that deep joy and also will yield the highest yield in our desire to be of service or to play our part for the greater collective? And a lot of the times that's where people get the biggest financial reward or social rewards in addition to their own personal rewards. So yeah, it's a really important topic. And I think that, again, this is that consciousness, this is that awareness. If we don't zoom out enough to really look at our lives and what is going on, and we get lost inside of the deluge of information and everybody telling us all of these things to do, I think that we can end up really on the wrong path and trying really hard and still not able to feel successful, which again is just simply repeating the very thing that can be driving the whole thing underneath, which is often I'm not good enough or I'm not lovable, or I'll be kicked out of the tribe if I'm not successful in XYZ ways. And I think that a lot is driving from there. And you'll see that that's translating, of course, very directly into the limbic system. And the limbic system can basically tank our ability to function in all of those higher order ways. So it's really up to us and our desire. We don't have to know the path. We don't have to know the answer, but can we challenge ourselves to ask the question and to live into the wondering? Because oftentimes on both neurological and energetic level, when we ask the question in a really fundamental way, when we really earnestly sit inside of that question, we're creating a pattern interrupt for our neurology. We're also creating an inlet for new experiences and new information to come in. A lot of the times we can't see something unless we're looking for it. So I would say it's important when we're inside of stress to really be looking for, how do I change this? Rather than how do I survive this? How do I construct reality? How do I create a different substrate for my existence? Not just make incremental changes and basically shame myself if I can't keep up with the perfect morning routine and I'm not always showing up as the perfect leader or whatever. That's coming from the broken standpoint. And that will reinforce stress for sure. And it will be very difficult for people to get out of it in a long-term and meaningful way.
That makes sense to me too, because the harder we try all of these things that are out there, the more stress it feels like, oh, but I was supposed to take this supplement. Oh, wait, I'm only supposed to eat this diet. Or, oh, I didn't get 8 hours of sleep. Oh, my Aura ring or whatever is dinging. I didn't do this, that, and the other thing. So I can see how when we find the things maybe external to us first, how that could be a little bit less efficient than maybe starting within ourselves with the things that we are empowered to change, like our brain. I'm very curious, when we do this kind of therapy with the brain, is this sort of, I want to say, a permanent shift, or is this something that we work at continuously, or something that we say do for the rest of our lives? I mean, sure, there's probably different stressors that come up and different challenges, but if we're working through one thing, does this create sort of a permanent change in the brain?
It's a fantastic question. And the answer would be found in how it's practiced. So neurofeedback therapy, in most cases, is practiced. You come once or twice a week. Most people have kind of just one system or one way of working with the brain. And in that case, it might take 5 sessions to really feel a difference and 30 to really make a more permanent or lasting change. And sometimes, depending on the scope and the skill level of the equipment and the practitioner, it could be somewhat limited. The impact as far as like how deeply does the person have an experience of change. The way that we practice it is that people come on site for either a private retreat for 1 or 2 or 3 days, or they come for one of our signature intensives for 5 days. And we see immediate change that is massive, like maybe 1 or 2 color differences, shifts on the EEG, just to kind of make it like a color idea. It's very difficult to describe 2 standard deviations and have the average person understand what that really means. But it's a massively statistically significant shift in electrical function before they leave, which is a felt experience for them. They've also had a massive amount of insight with working with me and helping them to understand a different strategy and way of approaching themselves, their life, who they are. And when they go home, they actually then have a continued neuroplasticity because we stimulate the brain in such a deep way that they end up having more and more function come online, more and more growth happen over the next 6 to 9 months or more. If and when they come back for additional studies with the EEG, we see continued improvement. We personally really like that. It's also a wonderful pattern interrupt because they come and they stay inside of a bubble and really unplug. And it's just so helpful and restorative and really, really deeply life-changing. And sometimes people do like to come back, but sometimes people feel like, okay, I got what I needed. But I also see we have a lot of people that continue to come back because let's say the first time they recover from the stress and burnout. And then the second time, if they do choose to come back, it might be, okay, now I want to be more connected in my relationships, or I want to be more in touch with my intuition, or I want deeper creativity at work now that I can see what I couldn't see before and I can relax into life more. It's endless, just like we are when we feel into our potential for development. It's endless what can be done for the brain. It can be very lasting change. It's intended to be if you get enough neuroplasticity going.
Wow, this sounds amazing. Maybe share with our listeners, I want to say the 1 or 2 sort of biggest shifts or changes that you see when you work with clients. What changes in their lives when they have this kind of therapy and maybe they're working continuously after that on it as well? What do you most often see that changes in a person's life when they do therapy like this?
Yeah, regardless of what people have requested. So we always focus on what they're requesting, regardless of what they've requested, which they do definitely get results in as well. we will see less reactivity. We will see people describe it in their own language, but it's basically there's a stimulus and then I have a pause before I do a response, whether that response is anger or freeze or whatever they typically would have done before. They have a sense of command of that. They have a sense of choice and they're making the better choices. And those choices, as the neuroplasticity continues and as they live into their life in the weeks and months to come, continues to compound. Typically, the spouse or the roommate or the colleague at work or whatever, they'll also see a massive change, almost to the order of scale is like, who is this person that came home from this event? What happened? You're so many of the things that I've always wished for you, and you're all of them this quickly. That's really amazing. And that might be more curiosity. It might be more playfulness, more lightness, better connections, again, with themselves and with the people around them. So these are the things that are quite universal. We also tend to see people have a much improved meditation experience so that it doesn't feel torturesome to close one's eyes because there's actually a quiet that meets that eyes closed state. So that's really fun. And then also, again, they may want to expand on it later, but typically a sense of creativity about what's possible for them, for the future, positivity for themselves and for the earth, what's going on right now with all the things here on the planet, which is super helpful. It's a grounded positivity. It's not a false high. It's like, oh, okay, I've let go of my own personal baggage. That's another one, is we do a huge amount of forgiveness work for folks. People are always shocked at how much gets cleared up when we do forgiveness work inside of them. They feel 1,000 pounds lighter after a session, for instance. The forgiveness work sessions are happening in an eyes closed state, and they kind of feel like a journey, truly. People are seeing and feeling, and it's like dreaming awake, and they end up forgiving themselves, others, how things on life on planet Earth is going, et cetera, and just shedding so much conscious and subconscious material that really was blocking everything that they were wanting, everything that they are that they didn't even know that they are, or things that they didn't even know that they were wanting. So it's such a huge list. Quality of sleep might change for the better. The list goes on. And that's just aside from whatever it is that they asked for. Those are just general things that are very consistent.
Wow. I can see how people on their own journeys to fulfillment, to purpose, to reconnecting with their joy and vision. And also, I can see this rippling into maybe some of the physical challenges that people have, even into things like chronic pain, because a lot of that, also if we're talking about neuroplastic pain, for example, and things like that, all affected by the brain, right? So I could see how this ripples out into so many domains in life. And then we make that change in the brain, and then it just kind of affects everything within us, without us. So.
Totally. I mean, it's the most important organ that we could attend to, in my estimation, like to protect from toxins, but also to work on improving. And yet in most paradigms, really, it's like, do we do crossword puzzles or think happy thoughts? Like, what are the real tools that are out there that are given? And I'm not saying that crossword puzzles and happy thinking isn't helpful, but we're talking about an order of magnitude here that is ridiculous of what's possible. Also in a time frame, because that's the other thing, is that it does take quite a lot to recondition and repattern a brain in most cases. There are acts of grace, or, there are definitely cases with psychedelics where people are getting big breakthroughs. But in the most people, they have to work hard to get a lasting change, because it just takes a lot of signal and input in kind of an imprecise way. And also there can be a lot of other competing signals and patterns in the brain that are very difficult to dismantle no matter what the methodology. And so the precision that's available with this kind of methodology is it's remarkable. And also the working of the symphony of the brain all at the same time is really remarkable. Being able to alleviate deep stressors from the nervous system that are existing inside of subconscious places. Oh, that's one of the things that I wanted to speak to as well when you were just kind of teeing up this topic. Everybody has deep stress, whether they know it or not. And I think that one of the big stressors is obviously our modern society, where we're taught to be really fierce hamsters spinning on a wheel. It's just an intense time. We're being bombarded electrically and and, with blue light and expectations and pacing and all of the things. But I'd say that another massive stressor is that we've become disconnected from each other. We've become disconnected from a sense of community, a sense of personal belonging that isn't about something that we feel like we have to earn via, again, that LinkedIn resume, but something that we innately are. It's an innate valuing that used to happen in more tribal communities and when we lived at a different pace and in a different time. And I think that another aspect of that as well is that most of us feel, I think, very disconnected from a sense of spirituality or a sense of the unseen or God or connection, and that can create a certain level of soul sickness or a certain level of deep subconscious pain that we've been taught doesn't matter, isn't practical, isn't part of adulting, or we just didn't even know that it was absent from our lives because we never had it. And maybe our families have lost that in our lineage for so long that it's forgotten. And yet we exist in such a way that we have not evolved past those very, very deep and fundamental needs, that I say would kind of come right up there in order of magnitude with food and shelter is connection, and connection to self and to other people, and also to a sense of something beyond. And that creates massive stress for people. And it's often something unnamed or unidentifiable, and therefore very difficult to really address.
That's really interesting. Yeah, because I think I noticed in myself and others as well, it's sort of an existential stress.
That's right.
We can't really put our fingers on this and say, well, it's not because we don't make enough money, or it's not because we don't have this, or we don't drive a fancy car or this. It's something different. Exactly as you said, we can't really name it. So very interesting. And maybe even we feel this a bit nowadays as a collective, and that sense of disconnection between each other. Yeah, globally. So
absolutely. I know that so much of what people are really hungry for as well is something to apply practically. So not just hearing this conversation, but actually processing it more deeply and asking questions inside of oneself, not at the level of the mind, but more at the level of contemplation and the level of deep desire. If you really have a desire for something to change, then that changes how your neurology is functioning. And it also changes what we see and what we attract to us. I know people love practical steps, and I don't want to miss out on the first one is the yes. Maybe the first one is the noticing. And then the second one is the yes. Yes, I want change. And I really mean it. And I'm willing to set aside the preconceived notions and to feel like I'm risking something to be able to get something that I want. Because that is how the world works overall. We know that. We have to take risks. If we want to have a loving relationship, we have to know that we're risking our heart being broken. And if we want less stress in our lives, if we want our lives to be something different, we have to be willing to take the chance that it's okay to change what we have. That's a big, important factor. And then the yes behind it, the bigger the yes is, the more likely we are to be able to find the way, for the way to be able to find its way toward us, even if I could dare say that. And then I think that as far as another practical tool that I would love to be able to share with folks is there's a breath practice, and it's available on the Holon website. So Holon Experience, HOLON experience.com. And there's a breath practice. It's very simple. It's very gentle. You learn it the first time or maybe a few times, eyes closed. But then after that, you can practice it with your eyes open, and it actually fits perfectly. Other people around you don't think you're weird because you're not breathing hard or anything like that. You're not having to count in the middle of a conversation. What I've found with that is that it actually is massive for creating a sense of neurological safety, biological safety, presencing, even if you're not, quote, good at meditation. And also with that, it creates a sense of interconnectedness. So the way that the breath is guided, it might make you wonder why it is that I'm guiding it in the way that I am. But what I have seen time and time again with real people over the decades is that that very simple breath can change everything. Not everybody can come or would be a great fit for a laboratory, or not everybody can, whatever. Maybe you live somewhere in the world, there's not a great brain neurotherapist around, but everybody has their breath with them all the time. Everybody has their yes with them all the time, right? That depth of awareness. And when we get really down to it, I think that those are some very, very basic things: fresh air, sunshine, good food, water, sleep, desire, and that depth of yes, right? And then a tool like that breath practice. The breath practice alone has changed people's lives, but that little combination of things that I'm just describing, it can be a massive tool. So I hope that that serves anybody who's listening, and best wishes in the journey for people to de-stress. And also what that really means is come into themselves and come into a better and more truer version of truth, of reality, because we aren't designed to carry that. We can't keep living the lie and then wondering why we're upset, why it's not working.
Beautifully said. And thank you for sharing those resources. Really appreciate it. And please, to our listeners, go and check Dr. Amy's website and start on the breath practice. See what that does for you in your life. Experience it for yourself and see what that brings up for you and how that makes changes for you. And Dr. Amy, thank you for spending this time with us. And I have a feeling a lot of our listeners might be very curious right now on how can they connect with you. You talked a little bit about your laboratory. What's available for our listeners as far as working with you? What kind of programs, services you have? Do you offer any events that people can connect with as well? What do you have on offer for our listeners?
Oh, thank you for asking. Yeah, we have a variety of different programs. So for people who are interested in doing, I'll say hands-on, wires-on work with their brain in our laboratory, we have our signature intensive, which we offer roughly 9 or 10 times a year to 3 people at a time. We also offer private retreats. So this is for our very, very most sophisticated technology in a very, very small, maybe a 1-to-1 ratio with the neurotherapist to the person, right? Very, very high touch, extremely fast results. We also, in the fall, are launching another version of an immersion. And the immersions, we have a lighter amount of technology, a slightly larger number of people, but it's still a small group of maybe 10 folks, 9 or 10. And we will be offering that sometime in October. So if somebody wants to know about that particular event, I would recommend going to the website and definitely getting on the mailing list, because we'll announce when that's available. I offer one-on-one work for supporting folks as a mentor in an intuitive capacity, but also in strategic guidance for businesses. And I didn't talk about it much in this conversation, but I've done a huge amount with scale, and I understand deeply how leadership can be really brought forward in a massive way, in a very unique way, and also how to just make businesses work better, whether it's business or intuition or just something else that somebody's wanting to work on. And then I also offer a 3-month program, which will also be launching in October for its 4th cohort. And that is called the Holon field. And in that, people understand neurosciences and they understand themselves as a being and can create a radically different understanding of themselves and reality and how to navigate through it. That's very, very much grounded in practicality, very much grounded in science, but also helps them to come into that feeling of interconnectedness in a very real way and move from the paradigm of working hard and manifesting into being a creator. That is a very, very powerful and profound shift. And it's automatically very stress relieving because it's such a deep alignment with the truth of one's being. So that's a 3-month program that's 100% online, and that's called the Holon Field. Those are some upcoming and or current options that folks can check out. And I know that everything that I'm describing is actually all at once. I'm doing as much of a simplifying as that I can, but it's also very complex. Anybody can always reach out and have a conversation, and I can, either myself or somebody on the team will help figure out what's the right fit with them. If they're just interested and they don't know what to choose, that's totally okay.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. And of course, we'll be linking to all of those things in the show notes as well. So be sure to check there on how you can connect with Dr. Amy, her team. Maybe you join the program in the fall and find out for yourself a little bit what this is all about and the kind of changes that are possible when we're working with the brain. I find there's so much magic that happens when our listeners connect up with our podcast guests, and then there's just magical things that happen. So I look forward to hearing from you. If you have tried any of this, if you work with Dr. Amy, let us know on the podcast what your experience has been and the things that you have found always so curious to hear more. And Dr. Amy, thank you so much for being here today, for sharing your wisdom. I feel that you have really had an amazing journey of discovery and still, of course, discovering more and working with the brain more as you're finding new technology, I'm guessing too, and in new ways of exploring. So thank you for taking the time to share that with our listeners today. It's been an absolute pleasure. I'm really grateful you were here today.
Oh, thank you. I am too. It's been really fun, and it's been an awesome feeling to be able to express some of what it is that we're up to. There's so much to all of it, and just to be able to touch in with you has been really delightful. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel that there's, as you said, we're standing on this edge of understanding how much we don't know. And yet I feel there's also a lot that we're discovering at the same time. As you said, since the 60s, I feel that this has come a long ways. So
Oh, yeah, definitely.
more exciting things coming. I feel that we will look back on and think, wow, this wasn't possible 5 years ago or wasn't possible 10 years ago. So yeah, I expect there are many more discoveries to come in the field of the brain in particular and consciousness. So thanks for sharing some of that and giving us some insight. And thank you everybody for tuning in today. It's been amazing spending time with you again. And until we hear each other again in our next episode, take care of yourselves and be well. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to listen in. If you enjoy the Jōrni Podcast, please support us by subscribing, sharing on social media, and leaving us a review. We appreciate you. And you can find more of The Jōrni on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and our website, thejōrni.com. Sending you love and courage, and see you next time.